Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on decoding consumer behavior in Asia. My name is Susie, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Appier. Before we get started, I just want to let you know how you can ask questions of our presenter today. So during the presentation, you can enter your question in the box at the right, and then we will address it at the end. Or alternatively, at the end of the presentation, you can raise your hand with the little hand icon also on the right and ask a question in real time. And we'll address it then. So that's all for now, and I will hand it over to Charles Ng.
Hello, hi everyone. My name is Charles. Hope everyone can see my screen. So today I'll be talking about AI, and in particular, how can we actually decode Asian consumers' e-commerce behavior using AI. A little bit about our company. Appier is first and foremost a technology company that is focusing on providing AI solutions. Okay, so the goal of our company is really to use AI to help enterprises solve all of their business problems. We were founded in 2012 in Taipei, but these days we have 14 offices over 12 different markets across the APEC region. So wherever you are, we have an office. Okay, we have worked with many different customers in the past, and still are. I'm not going to read through all the names here, but I'm sure you're going to recognize some of these. So let's start. I think it's without a doubt that the APEC e-commerce market is very significant, right? These days, it takes up about 50% of the global e-commerce market. Now, of course, a lot of this is dominated by China, and within China, it's mostly dominated by Alibaba, and it's to some degree JD. But because of the diversity of the region, because of the scale, we do think that there's a lot of room for niche players within this market. Okay. Now, the good news is that this is a growing market. Okay. By 2021, we expect to see about a 3.5 trillion USD size market overall. Most of this growth actually will be coming from the nascent markets like Indonesia, like Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, as opposed to the more mature markets like China or South Korea, Singapore. Okay, if you look at Southeast Asia as a whole, we expect to see about 3.8 million new internet users entering the market every month. So that is a phenomenal growth rate that actually puts the Southeast Asia region on the top as one of the highest growth markets or regions in the world. Okay, and these guys, all these new internet users, they are serious too. These are not just random people. It turns out that most of these people are very highly engaged. If you look at the amount of time that an average user spends online shopping in Southeast Asia, they usually spend about 140 minutes a month. Okay. In contrast, if you look at the amount of time that someone spends on online shopping in the US, for example, this is about 2x that. So everyone is really serious about e-commerce here in Asia. Okay. So all right, fine. This is all good, very good news, right? This is a growing market. Everyone is is highly engaged. So what is the catch? So it is a very intense market. I mean, there is a lot of competition in this region, right? China, of course, has Alibaba and JD, but each different country has their own local players. And of course, there are MNCs coming in as well. Okay. If you look at some of the activity on the VC front, you will actually see a lot of activity happening, and that's actually driving a lot of this competition as well. You know, last year, Tokopedia in Indonesia, they got a 1.1 billion USD infusion from Alibaba and SoftBank. Bukalapak is now also a unicorn, number 4, the 4th unicorn in Indonesia after Tokopedia, Gojek, Traveloka. And also Lazada is now majority owned by Alibaba, right? So all these are the big players, I would say, in Southeast Asia, along with many more. But it's an interesting dynamic that we're seeing right now. Okay, so how can we actually get an edge here? I mean, there are so many players in this field. What can we do, right? So how can we actually use data and artificial intelligence to try and get an edge? I mean, that's very important here. Okay, so this is the point of this whole presentation. I'm going to talk about a few areas where we can actually apply data and apply AI to help e-commerce. Okay. The first area that we can look at is how you can actually use data and AI to understand your customers. Okay. One characteristic of the region these days is that this is a highly mobile region of the world. If you look at all the e-commerce activity, actually 80% of that activity happens not in front of your PC, but actually on cell phones, right? So it's actually a very mobile, highly mobile population. So all this mobile activity has a couple of characteristics. Right? The first thing, the positive part of it, is that this is, being mobile allows you to collect a lot of data. There's a lot of data coming in, right? And for customers in the know, or for businesses or companies in the know, you can actually leverage all this data in a good way to optimize your customer engagements. Okay. On the flip side, because of all this mobile penetration, your data has become more and more fragmented. People are not spending all their time in front of a single device. In fact, they will have multiple devices. Okay, and this is the first thing that we can actually use data to help with. In fact, we should be using data and AI to solve this problem. Okay. I'm sure many of you are going to have multiple devices. Okay, I myself, I have 5 devices, right? I have a work laptop, I have a home laptop, I have a couple of tablets, and I have a cell phone. So I have 5 different devices. Now, to most businesses, I'm actually 5 different people because I show up on 5 different devices. Now, the first thing to do is to be able to identify which of these devices belong to the same person, which is me, right? And this is where we can actually use AI. Right? We can use artificial intelligence, machine learning to screen through all of these different devices and predict, okay, this device belongs to Charles, that device also belongs to Charles. Okay, that actually will give you a unified view of your customer. Okay, And it's important to be able to use AI here, because if you're not going to use something like AI with predictive capability, what you end up doing is having a bunch of rules. In fact, you end up with a lot of rules that are very, very difficult, first of all, to define, and also very, very difficult to maintain. Okay? And in the end, you don't even know if what you're doing is right or accurate. All right. So let's say you are able to use AI to get a unified view of your customer. The next thing is you can actually collect their activity across all the different devices. Right. So you can say, okay, Charles here, he has visited a page that talks about sports and tech, and then he visited a page that talks about finance and travel and tech, insurance, so forth, so forth, so forth. Right. So we can actually get all of this activity and tag and put them onto the same user. Okay, but that is not all. I mean, this by itself is just raw data. You cannot really do much with this data. Okay, what you really have to do is, again, to use AI to figure out what exactly is this person interested in by visiting these pages, right? So here, instead of just sports text, I can actually say that, okay, Charles is interested in basketball, right? And Bitcoin and travel and maybe iPhones and maybe budget travel, soccer and insurance, right? So this is, we can actually apply, big data, AI techniques to really extract these interests from the raw data themselves, from the actual raw sites that they have, that the person is visiting. Okay. Now, once we can do that, let's go back to the original picture. We're not just tying all of these devices to the same person. We're also able to extend the view of the person to get a 360 view of that particular person, right? So after running through all of this, I can actually say, okay, all of these devices belong to Charles. And by the way, he is interested in visiting France. Okay, he lives in Taipei. He likes wine, he likes running, he likes real estate, he likes sports, and maybe he's looking for some sort of Michelin restaurant. Okay, so that is how we can actually use AI to generate information about the customer that you otherwise would not be able to get. Okay, now once we have these sort of external 360 views, we can start looking at our customer segments. Okay, so let's say I have a group of people. You can say, okay, I want to take a look at my VIPs. Okay, or I want to take a look at the people who I acquired through a certain campaign. Okay, and I can take this customer segment and see what they're like, right? If you look at the left-hand side here, okay, this particular segment, okay, 20% of them like food, 40% of them like travel, right? 25% of them like beauty, and 30% of them like health. Okay, so that itself is some information right there. But you want to take a step further, right? You don't want to take these numbers as is. You always want to be comparing against a certain baseline, right? So in this case, you want to probably compare against the general population, let's say. And it might turn out that the general population is much more interested in travel. Maybe 50% of the population, the general population, is interested in travel, whereas this particular customer segment is only at 40%. So what does it tell us? That tells us that this group of people is actually not that interested in travel. Okay. However, they might actually be much more interested in food, because the general population only has a 10% probability of being interested in food, whereas this segment has 20%. Okay, so that is one way that you can actually use external data to understand your audiences. Okay, now once we are able to understand audiences, the next thing we want to be able to do is actually generate segments using AI, right? Now, usually when people get their hands on all these external interests, the first thing that they will do is they'll start running micro segments. Okay. So for example, if I want to find all the people who might be interested in going to Paris, then I could segment people by, okay, all the people who clicked on my Visit France campaign yesterday, someone who checked out tickets for Europe recently, or maybe shown some interest in Paris Fashion Week, not on my site, but on some other site. And between the age of 18 and 30. Okay. Now, it's very, very important to be able to do this very quickly, because that's actually what drives experimentation. Okay. Now, once people are able to do this, all right, they're going to start slicing and dicing and start experimenting. But at some point, you're going to ask, okay, which is the best way to actually segment my customers, right? So this is where AI is going to come in, right? So AI can actually predict patterns that humans cannot. You can actually use AI to detect hidden patterns, right? So let's take a look at this particular user journey. So there's this person booked a flight, right? Did some online search about the area, ignored some sort of promotion, he viewed something on a tablet, he favored a hotel. The question is, what is he going to do next? Right? I don't know, but AI is going to know, right? So AI has the ability to predict, or at least give a probability on what the next action or next event is going to be. Okay, and you can think about using this in many different ways. For example, I could try and predict which of my customers are most likely to convert in the next week. Okay, or I could try and predict which of my customers are most likely to churn. Right? Why would I want to predict that? Because a lot of times it's cheaper to try and keep them before they actually churn. Right? So once you can do that, once you figure out which customers are most likely to churn, you can maybe hit them with some sort of aggressive campaign, or maybe give them a coupon or a discount. Right? So there are many things that you can do once you are able to have this ability. Okay. So let's make this slightly more concrete. Let's go back to this example where we're trying to find the most suitable audience for Paris. Okay. Now there are so many different dimensions that you can actually segment your customers by. You could say, I want the people who are interested in France travel. I want the people who are interested in Europe travel. I want the people who visit my site last week, independent backpackers, frequent travelers, EVA Airlines, foreign exchange, and so on and so on. Okay. What you can do is you can take all of this information and you can actually throw it into an AI model. And AI will churn the numbers, and it will run through all the numbers, and they will tell you that, okay, France travel is pretty good, right? I'm going to give that a 33% weight. Okay, but you know what? If the person visited your site last week, that's even better. I'm going to give that a 77% weight. And what's even better is that if this person is a frequent traveler, then we should give that sort of dimension an 85% weight. Okay? And by the way, if the person has shown some interest in China travel, then they are probably not going to be interested in going to France at this particular point of time. Okay, so that is AI in action. Okay, now, up till now, we have been talking about finding customer segments, which are the best set of people to target, right? But we can use AI for a lot more than this. Okay, we can, for example, use AI to predict what products to recommend to a certain person. Okay, so recommendations is not a very new technology. It's been around for quite some time. I would say maybe 20 years. Okay, and you know there are many different algorithms and many different models that people have used for recommendations. For example, you can recommend items with similar product titles. Okay, you could use view algorithms. You know, if someone has viewed this, what tends to also be viewed along with this. Okay. You could use something as simple as hot items or trending items. Right? You could recommend things that are currently in someone's cart. That tends to have a very high conversion rate, but that tends to also have a very small volume. Okay. Now, if you want to get really fancy, you can actually recommend items with very similar images. So there are, it's possible to do that as well. Right? Now, the problem is there are so many different algorithms out there. Now, which one are you going to pick, right? So what we have been able to do is we have been able to build a deep learning model on top of all of these, that will actually pick at any particular point in time, which algorithm is the best one, okay? And apply that in real time to get an optimal recommendation for each person, okay? So if you actually compare the AI-based product recommendation with dynamic creatives in real time and compare that with some of the more traditional product recommendation techniques, you will actually end up with about a 10 to 20% lift in conversion rate, CVR. Okay, so let's look at an actual end-to-end example, right? So we talked about all these different types of things that you can do with AI. So let's actually go through an example and see how this might work for a EC. Okay, so let's say Jasmine, she likes to browse dresses on her tablet, right? And she does that during the weekends. Okay. Oh, by the way, this is actually a very common behavior in Southeast Asia, where people will browse a lot during the weekends, but they'll actually make their purchase during the weekdays, okay? Typically during business hours, except for Singapore. Singaporeans tend to do that at 10 p.m. at night for some reason, right? But most of Southeast Asia will browse during the weekends, and they'll actually make the purchase on a different computer during the weekdays. Okay, so this is actually typical behavior. Jasmine browsing on a tablet on Sunday afternoon. She looks at a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, and then she leaves her tablet, and she might not even be logged in at this point. She's just browsing, and she leaves the tablet, didn't buy anything. Okay, now the first thing we can do is we should actually try and predict if she is ready to buy. Okay, and remember when we talked about AI being able to predict all these different events, this is one event that we can actually predict for, is Jasmine ready to actually make a purchase, right? And why is this important? I think we should actually discuss this, because a lot of times when companies talk about engaging their customers, there is a hidden cost that people don't often think about. Now, when you're using something like paid media, the cost is relatively straightforward. It's usually something like CPC, CPA. But if you're using something like owned media, which is app notifications or email or web notifications, there is a hidden cost. The hidden cost is if you keep sending a user a lot of irrelevant messages, at some point they're going to turn you off. Okay, they're going to block your email, it's going to send it to spam, they're going to block your app notification in the best case. In the worst case, they will churn and not buy anything from you anymore. Right? But that's a serious concern when you're talking about engaging customers. So it's very important to actually try and predict whether or not someone is ready to buy, so you're not spamming everyone. All right. So you can use AI for that. You can actually, based on their browsing behavior, do we think that the person is ready to actually make a purchase? Now the next step is you can actually also use AI to predict what sort of dresses she might like. Okay. Now that could be the same dresses as before, but it also could be something different as well, right? And AI can help you figure that out. All right. Now once we have that, I know who to target. I know what to target them with. The next question is, where am I going to target? Okay. We know that usually people don't carry their tablets around. At least I don't carry my tablets around, right? It's usually sitting at home, and then I only use it maybe during the weekends or maybe late at nights. So most of the time, I don't have my tablet with me. So how are you going to actually reach me? We can actually use AI to predict what other sort of devices Jasmine might own. Okay. And using all of this information, on Monday morning, when she's commuting to work, maybe on MRT, you can actually send her a notification saying, hey, are you interested in these dresses? And that would be an end-to-end usage of AI. Okay, so on top of that, let's talk about the fourth thing that you can do, is to actually acquire similar users to your VIPs. Okay. One thing that we have noticed is that different interests, different external interests, can lead to different LTVs. I think that's fairly obvious, right? I mean, if you're a travel company, very likely people who are interested in travel will have high LTV. If you are a shoe company, and people who are interested in a lot of shoes will have high LTV. So there are, of course, the obvious insights, but there are also a lot of non-obvious things that could surface from analyses based on these interests. For example, did you know that people who like leather shoes often like marathons as well? So maybe that's something that could drive some sort of campaign. Okay, or we have also found that people who like certain types of sports tend to spend more on certain types of apps that have nothing to do with sports. Okay, so these are the sort of insights that people generally use our platform for. So here's a very interesting example. Okay, we worked with a company called Neogens. So Neogens is a famous skincare brand here in Taiwan. Okay. And they used our Ison platform last year for the Singles Day sales period in 2018. Okay, so they used the AI functionalities of Ison to be able to run both their retargeting campaigns and their lookalike new acquisition. Okay, the results were quite impressive. Yeah, we got like a 11% improvement in CPC, and that came with an 87% increase in web retention rate, and overall ROI increased by 14%. Okay, so these results by themselves were impressive enough, but that's not the end of the story. So Neogens over the past few months have used Ison and our external interest to start digging down into their customers' preferences and external behavior. Okay, and what they found is that people who like their products tend to be very, very environmentally conscious. Okay, so people who like gens, also like non-recyclable plastics, something like that. Okay, so because of this insight, right, they have been able to drive their first green ocean green campaign, where they actually got a bunch of their customers to go help clean the beaches of Taiwan, right? And that it also drove their first product, the Reef Safe product, Reef Safe sunscreen, where the focus was on green environment. Okay. All right. So at this point, maybe you're thinking, okay, this is wonderful. AI is great. I would like to hire a few data scientists and start building up my own stuff. Like building up my own models. Okay. So if you're planning to do that, or maybe you do have your own data scientists on staff, here is what you would typically expect if you are trying to build models or AI from scratch. Okay? So let's say you come up with some idea, like I want to build a predict churn model, for example. You tell your data scientists the first thing that they will have to do is that they will have to do a lot of data cleansing. Okay. The reason for this is because data is all over the place. Okay, depending on the source of the data, it could be sitting in a different database. Okay, depending on the business unit that's responsible for it, it could be sitting behind a different firewall. It could be in a different format. Okay, and the naming of the data is different, so you have to spend a lot of time trying to understand what each piece of data means. Okay, so data scientists tend to spend a lot of time running around and making sure that they understand what all the data means, and then tie all of that together. Okay, now that usually takes maybe a few weeks, right? Once we get that in shape, you start building some AI models. Okay, now if you have a senior data scientist, they might have seen some of these models before. They don't have to do a lot of research. That's great. They can start implementing stuff. But usually what happens is that they will have to do a lot of research. They have to read up on something. They have to read a paper. They have to try out certain ideas. That also could take a few weeks, right? And finally, you get to the stage where you can actually start training your models. Training your models means that you take the data, push it through the model, and get it to the form that I can use. Usually, this is fairly fast, but if you're unlucky and you pick like a deep learning model, that could actually take a few weeks too. And finally, you're going to get to some stage where you can actually evaluate the results of your model. Okay, and usually the first time you do it, there are two things that could happen. Right? One thing that could happen is that you're going to get results that are too good to be true. Right? Usually this means that you have a bug in your code. Right? The other thing that could happen is that the results are not as good as you hoped for. Okay? Usually this means that there's no bug in your code, and you just picked the wrong model, or you don't have very good data. Okay, so you might end up having to do this maybe 2 or 3 times. Okay, all in all, I would say you would be lucky if you get something within 2 months. Okay, so that's I would say the typical minimum amount of time that it would take to go from ideation all the way to getting something into a deployment stage where you can actually use. Okay, so this is where Ison comes in, right? Ison is our data science platform, and it can take you from 2 months to 5 minutes. Okay, so the idea is that we are there to be able to fast track your data science capabilities, I like to call it our data science in the box, right? What does that mean in particular? Right. So again, if you are a head of marketing department or head of some sort of business unit, you would like to start thinking about introducing data science capabilities into your organization, right? You should consider using Ison, right? Because we have the following functionalities that you typically expect from a data scientist. Okay. The first thing is unifying fragmented data, right? Remember at the very beginning of the talk, we talked about being able to get all of these different behaviors across different devices and tying them together. This is one of the core functions that we do within Ison. Okay. On top of that, we have ready-made models, ready-made AI models like churn prediction, conversion predictions, lookalikes, etc., that you do not have to build again, right? These are fairly common models that apply to everyone. We do not have to reinvent the wheel here, okay? Number 3 is being able to generate insights, okay? Remember, one of the values that we bring with Ison is the fact that we have all this external data, this 360 profiles of everyone in the APEC region. And all of this is natively integrated with our AI models and our Ison platform so that we can actually generate insights off of this data. Okay. And finally, we allow you to easily just take action, right? So it's, you can build the best models you want, you get the best insights. Everything is a waste of time unless you can actually put this into some sort of production scenario where you're actually using the results, okay? And Ison allows you to send this off into paid media, send this off into your own media, send this off into your own data lake or CRM or DMP systems so that you can actually execute on these results, okay? And finally, the most important thing is that this whole platform is not designed for data scientists in mind, right? It is not, it doesn't assume that you are a data scientist to be able to use this data science platform, okay? In fact, it is designed assuming that you are a business person, a marketer, right? And it's user-friendly. All you have to do is go into the platform, go into product, open up a brain, you pull in the data, step number 1. Step number 2, you preview, fine-tune it, and finally, just one click, deploy it off to whatever platform or whatever destination that you would like, including your own CRM systems, including messaging systems, DMPs, and IQA, which is our marketing automation system as well. Okay, so for more information, we do have a white paper that is out. Feel free to download that. Or if you would like to understand more about our Ison product, feel free to contact us as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charles, for that. We are going to move on to a couple of questions. So if anybody has, we've received a couple, if anybody has any more, please feel free to raise your hand with the icon there. One question is about whether or not we'll share this presentation. We will share the recording of this entire webinar, so you'll be able to look through and find the content that you're looking for along with Charles's commentary on it. Okay, so let's dive into a couple of questions. So thanks for those who sent those in. So Charles, first question for you is, as marketers, how can we know when we need a data science capability?
I would say that it's never too early to start, right? And for anyone, whatever stage that you're currently in, you should be thinking about trying to incorporate data science into your operations. Okay, so what typically happens is there's going to be some sort of evolution, right? So typically you're doing some sort of operation, and then you start having to deal with data. Maybe it's because of some sort of measurement, right? So you're going to be hiring maybe some analyst types folks where that will be able to manage your data for you, or start generating reports based off the data. Okay, and after that, what tends to happen is that you will start trying to forecast what's going to happen in the future, right? So this is when you're going to need slightly more experienced folks to be able to make forecasts or do much more interesting things with the data. Okay. Now at the very end of it, then you want to be hiring more senior data scientists that can actually build these models that I was talking about here. I would say it is a progression. Yes.
Great, thank you. And we have another one. I think you've already touched on this a little bit, but perhaps we can dive into it a bit further. You were explaining at the end about whether or not, that Ison is designed with marketers in mind, but we have a question about whether there are any special skills or talent required to use Ison. And can you explain a bit further how marketers use it, and whether or not a data scientist might also use it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So again, I mean, Ison is not designed with the data scientist in mind specifically. It was actually designed with a marketer in mind, right? So because of this, we actually make it very user friendly, in the sense that there's very little technical terminology in Ison, right? It has a very easy to follow workflow that you can actually just follow to create a result that you want, right? However, if you're a data scientist and you're also interested in using something like Ison, what typically happens is that data science teams are very interested in the external interests that we provide, right? Now, if you use Ison, you can actually download these interests into, or export these interests into your own CRM systems, okay? And you can actually use those to build your own models. So that's what typically a data science team would be doing with this information. But you do not have to have a data science team in order to use Ison as is.
Great. Thank you so much. Those were all the questions we received. So if anything else comes up for our attendees today that they'd like to ask, please do get in touch with us. And of course, please do download the white paper that we mentioned earlier. And we really look forward to being in touch with you in the near future. Thank you, everybody, for their time. And thank you, Charles.
Thank you. Bye-bye.